Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metzler. We have a great show tonight. We have some rock and roll royalty in the house, talking about a great event coming up, and a new record coming out. First of all, Mr. Tom Murray, the drummer for the original Litter that got started in 1966, and a fellow by the name of Mike Owens, who runs Blackberry Way Records. He started recording bands in 1974 through 1993 and still has his label Blackberry Way. And he's worked with everybody from The Replacements to Soul Asylum, Trip Shakespeare, and more. We have enough information here for several shows. We're going to try to encapsulate the whole thing into one show. Let's start with Mr. Tom Murray, who I had the pleasure of meeting once at Shaw's Bar, I believe. Tom, you're the original drummer for the Litter, and, I grew up, I'm a little younger than you, but I remember the Litter playing up at the Armory in my hometown of Virginia, Minnesota. You guys played a lot back then in Minnesota, right?
Absolutely. And we rocked the Iron Range.
Yeah.
It was like, sold out audiences when we played up there, and we just loved playing up there.
When did your first record come out?
In 1967.
Okay.
That was a Distortions album.
Okay.
And we got one still today, a global song out of it called Action Woman.
Okay.
And I remember the first time I was only like 16 going on 17, and we were in the car with my mom, and it came on the radio.
Because moms have to drive the band to the gig, right?
Yeah, I was doing something with Mom that day.
Yeah.
And it came on, and it threw me off because I went, God, I've heard that song. And then I realized it was the Litter. And I went, Mom, that's me. That's me. And I think it was on WGGY.
Okay.
One of the big stations. And they really pushed the record. And it was a pretty big local hit here. Yeah.
Well, you had 3 records come out between 1966 and 1968. And what was the record that sold over 500,000 copies?
It was a Emerge album.
Okay.
And the original singer with the first 2 albums, Distortion, $100 Fine, was Denny Waite.
Okay.
And then Zippy Kaplan, he was a guitar player. And they both quit at the same time. Okay. And so we brought in a singer called Mark Gallagher and Ray Molina. Okay. And we got our management got us a 2-record deal with ABC Probe. Okay. And so the first one, Emerge, again, it did really well. It was #1 album in Puerto Rico. And
did you get down there to play?
Yes, we did.
Oh, cool.
And it was 19 cities, #1 album in 19 major cities.
Fantastic. Who was managing you back then?
Scott Deneen.
Okay, was it a local guy or?
No, he was out of Chicago.
Okay.
And it was just great. I mean, it was great times, and the one I just want to share one story that really happened is we got a call. We had a #1 album in New York State, and we were playing New York, New York and Poughkeepsie, New York, and some other places, and. We got a call from the Woodstock people, and they said, "Would you like to play Woodstock?" And our manager said, got this Woodstock date, and we said, "Well, what is
little
it?"
festival in Woodstock?
This little festival, and he spaced it out. And after about a month and a half, or however long it was, when he finally got to the people, they said, sorry, the show's all booked up. And that was probably the biggest disappointment of the whole Litter legacy.
But you guys, your lovely wife Jan just showed me on the phone a poster from, was that Chicago gig? It was Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull. Who else was on that?
Savoy Brown.
Savoy Brown. So Just drop some. You've also played with Alice Cooper when he was coming up, and then he became kind of a fan of the Litter.
Yeah, we actually we were playing out in Venice, California.
Okay,
I think it was Venice or somewhere around there, and we were staying at the Holiday Inn, and we got kicked out because we were a little too rowdy.
Rock and roll band.
And
a rock and roll band getting kicked out of a hotel. Okay, I got it. I can picture that.
So we were playing this place called the Cheetah.
Okay.
And it was on Santa Monica Pier. That's where it was. And we were playing there with, I believe, Genesis and I got to keep on thinking of the name of the band. The guys that did I'm spacing out.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes you forget those days.
That's deep.
It's
rock and roll.
Iron Butterfly.
Okay, yeah. Indigado de Vida.
Yeah. And so the lady that was running the venue.
I could still play that drum solo. Anyway,
yeah.
As long as we're banging on the table. Yeah, you can play. You're the drummer. There you got it.
And so she invited us to her house, because we hadn't, we just, we were kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
And so I walked in the foyer of her home. Encasing, she had one of the Beatles' drum heads, and which Ringo gave her an original Beatle drum head, and I was blown away. And out in the garage, he wasn't Alice at the time, but he was Vince.
Okay.
He was living in the garage. He had a snake. And that's
he had a snake in the garage.
Yeah.
Of course he did.
So we spent the night there, and then we hung around. We were going up to our next date was up in San Francisco at the Fillmore out there, and so we got to know him.
Wow.
We were hanging out. We were there for about 4 or 5 days, and then he started to when he had his radio show on Sirius, he would play the Litter stuff.
Cool.
And tell some stories about that. And I thought that was really cool. We're trying to get a hold of him right now. So Alice, if you're listening,
yes,
please get a hold of me.
We're going to switch it over here. Like I said, we've got so much information, so little time. To Mike Owens, the owner and main cat at Blackberry Way Records. We're going to just jump around in the timeline here. But Mike, with this show coming up at Mancini's tomorrow on March 8th from 2 to 5 on West 7th, they're one of the best steak and martini joints in Minnesota, if not the upper Midwest. You put out the new Litter record, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, now tell us a little bit what's on there. What can we expect to hear?
It's a really good record with all sorts of different kinds of songs, really. There's a cover tune of For What It's Worth that's by Stephen Stills that's really good. The Miracle is kind of a fantasy type song. And there's hard rock. There's a little bit of something for everybody on there, I think. And Tom used to book my band Fingerprints back in the day, and that's where we first kind of met a long time ago.
Who else was in Fingerprints?
Rob Henry, Kevin Glenn, Steve Felstead.
Right, Steve Felstead,
myself,
right.
And
because Steve ended up being an engineer for Blackberry Way.
Well, he was one of my partners.
Yeah, okay.
3 of us from Fingerprints, Kevin Glenn, Steve Felstead, and myself started the recording studio in 1974. And the other kind of funny connection, I guess, is Paul Stark owned the house that we initially started the business in.
For those of you out there in the Wall of Power radio or land that don't know, Paul Stark was the prime mover behind Twin Tone Records.
Right, yeah. We were in my parents' basement, and I'm sure they were ready to get us out of there, and stuff like that. We actually recorded a few records there and stuff.
Fun.
But then Twin Tone was having their tryout for the label that was just starting. And so it ended up the first 3 records on their label were Fingerprints, The Suburbs, and Curtis A.
Right.
And
Courtesy of Curtis A.
Yeah, we went down there to try out or whatever, to audition, I guess would be the right way to say it. And we had better equipment than Paul did, and so we kind of got to know each other, and we needed a place to do it, and he was more interested in doing the label. So kind of a hippy-dippy deal. We'd moved all our stuff down there, and that's how it started. But what's interesting is Paul was the sound man for Straight Up, which was Tom's band after The Litter. And so Zeno lived there at the time, who was Cheap Trick's first singer, and became the lead singer of Straight Up.
Somebody's got to do a Minneapolis St. Paul rock and roll family tree like they used to do in Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you guys right there, there's a tree with several branches and roots. We've got Mike Owens from Blackberry Way Records and Tom Murray, the original drummer, still the drummer for The Litter. We're going to listen to that great Litter hit from 1967, Action Woman, and we'll be back with these gentlemen for the whole show tonight.
Hey, Miss High and Mighty, I had all I can take, walking right on by me. That's your last mistake. I've gotta find myself some action to satisfy my soul. A little mind distraction before I lose control.
turn in vain to escape the shots of light pursuing me through a window frame of cold and quiet snow. We are running over blue ice fields, feeling the color of the ice. To turn to shield the burn of the light which reflects in so many.
That is some rockin' late 60s stuff, Tom Donahue. That was The Litter, their song Blue Ice. Man, that was rockin', man.
The whole album is really cool.
Yeah.
You know, we changed the format. The first two albums we did was more the garage band kind of sound and psychedelic, you know. And then when Denny left the band and Zippy left the band, that's when we went to this more hard rock.
Was that Mark Gallagher singing?
That was Mark Gallagher.
So who wrote the tune? That particular one?
Well, I was co-writer on that one.
Okay. So where did you record?
In Detroit.
Okay.
Right outside Detroit. And our producer was, his nickname was Punch.
Okay.
And he did all the Bob Seger stuff.
Really?
MC5.
Wow.
He was
Mitch Ryder, probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
He did a lot of the Detroit bands. You know? And so he came in, and actually that album it only took 24 hours.
Wow.
We just went in there and rocked.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a great time, and that's when The Litter went national. Right then and there. You know.
And there is an album out that's got half MC5 songs and half Litter songs on it.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where can you track that down?
On the internet, you know.
Wow.
It'll come up if you search for The Litter.
For those of you that just tuned in to the Wall of Power Radio Hour, this is your host, Paul Metsa, with my guest, Tom Murray, the prime mover behind The Litter, who's got a new record coming out on the Blackberry Way label, with my other guest, the president of the label, Mike Owens. Tell us, Tom, going back now, you played with dozens of bands that are now just part of the American and British consciousness, but you played with Pink Floyd when they had Syd Barrett.
Yeah.
Where was that gig?
That was in New York.
Okay.
And it was called the Cheetah Club.
Okay.
And it was really cool.
How old were you guys back then?
I was around 21.
Wow.
Yeah.
You must have just been having a ball.
Yeah, and it's every band that we played with, because I learned from the biggest ones, the Zeppelins, the Who's,
right,
the Pink Floyds. It to me, and it was about the litter was the attitude.
Right.
You know, and without an attitude, you're just normal.
Well, speaking of attitudes, you guys played with the Who, and who had any bigger attitude than Keith Moon? Do you remember that gig with the Who?
I have a story about that if you'd like to hear it.
I certainly would love to hear that, Tom. Yes.
We were playing in Chicago at this I think it was the auditorium, but it was a venue that it was like levels that went up, and it was all gold. And that was when the Who were doing Tommy. And I was hanging with them, and I thought it was really cool. And
well, hanging with the Who is cool, for sure.
Was cool. and I was into this cat named Meher Baba.
Yeah, sure.
And I was talking with Townsend because I was wearing a Meher Baba, pin.
Yeah, and Townsend was into that Guru too, right?
Yeah, and the song Baba O'Reilly he wrote that, and he wrote albums for him, and. So we're doing the show. First song, place is packed, and I break my drum head, my snare head, and my roadie always sat behind me, and I always carried two snares.
Smart.
So boom, one went off, the next one went on, and I broke that one.
Right.
On the second song, so I am freaking out.
You're a madman.
And that was the old days of the snare drum. They had the little key, and you had to keep on screwing it off.
Yeah.
Each a different one. And from the side wings, I hear, "Hey!" And here's Keith, and he has his snare drum in his hand,
Solidarity.
And he goes, "Here!" And he throws it to me. My tech, had the drum, and I didn't want to pound it too hard, so I made sure that I wasn't going to break that one.
Sure, don't break keys.
But, ever since that day, I always told my techs, wherever concert we're doing, if any drummer ever has a problem, you make sure that,
hey, I love
you
that.
help them out, And I was blown away. I'm just, just going, how cool is this?
So what, were you guys playing festivals too? Because rock festivals were just starting to happen back then.
Yeah, we were doing some of them. One, I remember, it was in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And
Madtown.
And we were on after Grateful Dead. and the Grateful Dead, it was supposed to be a 45-minute set.
Right, not the Dead.
But the Dead, they didn't care. So they were on and on and on and on. So we got all drunk waiting to go on stage. And I always remember that gig because I hated them for a while,
right?
Because we sucked that night. That was the only job we ever sucked.
You were hammered,
But and again, my most famous story is we were playing with Zeppelin, and we did a two-day gig there at the Connecticut Playground. It was called, and then they changed it to the Electric Theater. It was on in north side of Chicago.
Okay.
And there were 5,000 inside, and those were the days where everyone would bring pillows and sit on the floor, take acid and and have a good time. And so it was
Trip the light fantastic, as they say.
And there were 20,000 people outside that couldn't get in.
Wow.
To the show, and that was Savoy Brown, Led Zeppelin, Jeff Luttrell, and the Litter. And so that afternoon, I went to the venue. No one was in it, and I would always practice. And John Bonham comes walking in with another.
Tom Murray, you were such a name dropper. Keep going.
Okay.
Paul McCartney told me years ago, Metza, don't be dropping names. But anyway, keep going.
Well, I have to drop this because this was the greatest moment of my drumming career.
Yeah, let's talk more.
And so he came in with another double kick, and he played it for a while. He said, can we jam? And I'm going, yeah.
Were you doing one kick drum or two yourself?
Two.
Okay.
And Ginger Baker influenced me to do that when we played with Cream. And so here we are. We're jamming, just John and I. And we're doing each other licks back and forth. And I'm just in heaven. I'm just going, God, John Bonham.
Yeah.
How cool is this? And but he played his double kick for probably 5 minutes, and he said, nah. And he threw it all the way across the hall. And so I think I was probably one of the only people that ever saw him try to do a double kick, you know. And then after that, all the other drummers came in, and no one was in it. It was the afternoon. It was closed. Right. And then all the bands came in, and it ended up with one huge jam session for every one of these bands.
Wow.
You know.
That's incredible. We will be back in the third segment of the Wall of Power Radio Hour with my guest, Tom Murray from The Litter, and from Blackberry Way Records, Mike Owens. Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metz. We just heard a track called 60 Cycle Rumble by my guest, Mike Owens, also the president of Blackberry Way Records. I should know this. What is the reference, Mike Owens, with that great tune of yours, 60 Cycle Rumble? What's the reference to 60 Cycle?
Well, there's a hum that you get in a tube amplifier.
Okay.
And I think that's where it came from. I just needed a crazy name for the song, and it's not even in the lyric or anything like that.
Well, then our good mutual friend, Brian Drake, had a band called 60 Cycle Hum.
That's right.
He probably stole it from you, that plagiarist.
No, I probably stole it from him.
We love Brian Drake. In fact, we're going to play a Brian Drake tune in the fourth segment of the show tonight. It's a really interesting kind of mixing of the decades here in the musical styles, because we have Tom Murray from The Litter, the drummer, who is really kind of came of age in the mid to really the late 60s with his band The Litter. And then Mike Owens with Blackberry Way Records. You guys were really on the cusp of the late 70s and certainly early 80s punk scene.
Right.
Recording at your studio, Soul Asylum, The Replacements, Trip Shakespeare, the Suicide Commandos, the Flaming O's. Tell us how that really came about with your relationship with Paul Stark.
Yeah, really, when we first, with my band Fingerprints, we tried out for Twin Tone, and of course my good friend I grew up with, Peter Jesperson, was part of the Twin Tone hierarchy. And
the gatekeeper.
As we said earlier in the show, we had better equipment than Paul did at the time, and so we formed a mutual bond and moved in there, and so we recorded all the early Twin Tone stuff as well as whatever came in off the street. And
so where was your studio?
606 13th Avenue Southeast in Dinkytown.
Okay.
And we were there for years. We eventually bought the building from Paul and eventually became a full 24-track facility. We started off we had a 1-inch 8-track, and it was really cool times, and I wish, like nowadays, everybody's got a phone with a camera on it. And,
yeah, right.
And back then, there's hardly any pictures, but if we could have pictures, I mean, we had Marshall Crenshaw come through, and we opened for Blondie at the Longhorn, and they came after the show.
Right.
And
but had there been cell phone cameras and videos back then for how you guys were partying, you would have all been in jail.
Well, probably, yeah. There's some truth. There's some truth to that.
Tell us a great replacement story, because Let It Be was recorded at Blackberry Way, and that's considered one of the most influential records of the modern era.
Yeah, well, I remember Peter Buck hanging out from REM. He played on a track called I Will Dare. And,
sure.
And then he fetched beer and stuff like that. So, but that was just normal, people would be coming in and out, and and you didn't really think that much of it. You were just living it every day, you know. I remember Bob Stinson, talking to him one day when I was telling him, because I think it was at a point in time when Fingerprints had broken up and the Commandos had broken up.
Of course, Bob is, of course, for those of you who don't know, the lead guitarist for the Replacements.
Correct.
And a great guy, good record store and guitar store buddy of mine, but keep going.
I was trying to give him some advice, you know, from an older guy. That,
sure.
You know, enjoy this while you can, because
right.
sometimes your next band, even though it's good or maybe even better than your first band, sometimes it just doesn't click. You don't automatically go from, you know, everybody packing the clubs to everybody still packing the clubs.
Right.
And Bob's going, yeah, well, if I get out of this band, I'll just get in another really good band, you know. So he wasn't hearing any of it, but
from hero to zero, as they say. Right?
Yeah, and we have to give Tommy rides because he wasn't of age yet and stuff like that. So
Tommy Stinson.
So he couldn't drive. So sometimes we give him rides home, or you know.
I remember because when I moved to Minneapolis in '78, I lived 6 blocks away from Orphan Jokopis, where Jesperson worked, of course, and every rocker in that time hung out and bought records. But I remember Tommy Stinson, maybe at 13 years old, hanging out on his lunch hour down there.
Right, yeah.
You know, and I started hearing about him and got to see him early on. But you also, and now we're going to weasel back to our other guest, Tom Murray from The Litter. You also recorded the Trashmen at Blackberry Way.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
So now, Tom, going back, what Minnesota bands were you playing with before you really, well, even after you hit nationally with The Litter? Did you play with the Trashmen?
No, I was never in the Trashmen.
No, did you play with them? I mean, The Litter.
No, they were before my time. But but I did go see them. I was probably 13 at the time, maybe. And but I remember seeing the Underbeats.
Right.
And I was going, this is cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the early 60s bands that I saw that were local.
Right.
Tom, you played in the Castaways briefly, too, didn't you?
Oh, yes, right. Yeah.
Okay.
We took they were kind of, Denny Craswell, we went to school together, and we used to, you know, come home from school, and one week it would be at my house, and we'd jam together.
Right.
And, you know, so Denny was a really close, you know, friend, you know, when we were going to school. And then suddenly I got a call.
Where did you go to high school?
To Edina.
Okay.
But I was in Edina, and I was wearing Italian shoes and tight pants, and riding motorcycles, and everyone was in GTOs and wingtip shoes, and so I was the James Dean of Edina.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
Right.
Yeah, and so then Dick Roby called me and said, "Hey, we have a Canadian tour, and with the Castaways." And I said, "Oh, cool," you know. And so I went and did a whole Canadian tour with the Castaways when I was before The Litter, and I got back from that tour, and I went to the State Fair, and I played at the B-Sharp booth. Some guy offered me, he said, "I'll give you $100 if you can do an hour solo."
Right.
I said, "No problem."
Yeah.
So we did an hour solo, and
was that an hour drum solo?
An hour drum solo.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Had to be in shape.
But I wanted $100.
Well, yeah. And $100 back then was $500 now.
Yeah, and the two bands that merged, that what became Litter, was the Tabs and the Victors.
Okay.
And they saw me. They were right there, and they saw me at the fair, and they went, "You want to play with us?"
Wow.
And I said, "Yeah." And so that's how it all started.
You know, you think about, there was a great memorial for Jim Johnson from the Underbeats at Shaw's Bar, where I play every Thursday night at 5:30, 16th and University. And so James Walsh was there, and the original roadie for the Underbeats. And you think back of that mid to late 60s rock and roll scene, man, the Trashmen, The Litter, the Underbeats, the Castaways. And then you had all the local bands that didn't get the national acclaim that maybe guys like The Litter and the Castaways got, but you had Lonnie Knight's Joker's Wild and the Del Counts. I mean, Minneapolis was one rockin' town back then.
It was, and it carried the scene through today. There's no other scene than what Minneapolis has done. and that's why the party and the release party that we're having, there's going to be over 60 bands that are from that era.
And that's coming up tomorrow from 2 to 5 at Mancini's, Char Bar on West 7th. And Mike, you said there's going to be a DJ there playing music by as many of the guys as he's got time to play.
Yeah, Michael Ware, who has a show, Mike's Minnesota Warehouse, and he's got an extensive collection and knowledge of all the Minnesota bands over the years. And so he'll be DJing and playing tracks, and we're hoping he can kind of coordinate it where if somebody from Stillroven happens to walk by, that he can play Hey Joe and maybe talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And the concept here is if at least one person from each band committed to us to be there, then we write them down on the list that there will be a representative of that particular band. And we've got everyone from the Suicide Commandos to the Trashmen to the April Fools, Joker's Wild, obviously the Litter and Pepper Fog.
Yeah, sure.
Our great friends Dale and Greg.
Yeah.
And Tet Noir and the Underbeats and stuff like that. So the list goes on, and it should be a great day. There's going to be, we got about 80 bands that people have committed from bands to be there.
Yeah, it's pretty much around,
somewhere in that area.
So, and everyone's excited. Everyone's going, because when I thought of this to have, because I was going, okay, we're going to do the Litter vinyl release, and I needed something else, and I thought, let's take the last 60 years of the royalty and the people that made records, for the last 60 years, and get them all together, because we're losing. We're losing cats, just about every month.
No, and it's a good hanging. Mancini's, they did. I have a TV show with Wall of Power TV, and we went down and taped the reunion of Gypsy at Mancini's 2 or 3 years ago. And number one, Pat and John Mancini do a great job as hosts of that bar, and lots of parking, which is cool.
Jim's going to be there, by the way, James Walsh.
Oh, great.
He's going to be there.
And so it's going to be a great hang, and you're absolutely right. We got to get together every chance we get, because like they say, you only get one day at a time. So Mike Owens, tell us about... I was around and I remember it, but I wasn't a hands-on punk rock guy. I've always been a folk and blues guy. But it must have been exciting working with, these bands we mentioned, the Commandos and Soul Asylum and the Replacements and Trip Shakespeare, to watch that part of the Minneapolis sound as not the Prince Minneapolis sound, but the white rock and roll sound start to come together and really to get national attention.
Yeah, it was. And it was, the funny thing is it's always referred to as the punk era, but I don't think too many of us really considered ourselves punk bands. We were all just doing our version of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles or whatever. More blues-based rock and stuff like that. But it got to be called New Wave, and New Wave used to be... Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen and
Blondie,
Elvis Costello and Blondie. It's a new group of people, a new age group of people in their 20s. Eventually, it got to be a kind of music.
Right.
And so then, you play at the Longhorn. Well, you can't play here because you're a new wave band. We'd run into that because we'd play all over the state and, Chicago and stuff like that.
And now we are all old, grizzled vets. Yeah. We've got Mike Owens from Blackberry Way Records on and Tom Murray from The Litter. We've got one more segment on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. Stick around. We'll be back after these messages.
Straight to the heart. It's a hard road to follow, too big to swallow. All stops before it can start. You can't hear the bells start. No.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. We just heard a little bit of my good friend Brian Drake's song, Bell of Stone, off the April Fool's record, Third. My guest, Mike Owens from Blackberry Way, Tom Murray from The Litter. Let's talk a little bit about Brian Drake. He also has his day job. He's a great mortgage guy out at RBCU, and he set me up with my Reef 5. I want to thank him on that. But now he's rocking harder than maybe he's ever rocked before. How far do you go back with Mr. Drake?
Oh, God, we go back to about 84, 83, somewhere in there. He came to Minnesota to record. Well, they came to Minnesota, and he had a band called The Quiz. And
you're a Wisconsin boy, right?
Yeah, from Wisconsin. And they recorded at the studio, and so we met at that point in time. And his bass player at the time, Gary Menny, became my bass player in the Idle Strand eventually because I stole him from Brian, I guess.
See how you are.
Yeah, see how we are. And but we go way back, and then his band, Idiot Savant, was the first band we signed to the label. In addition, of course, we had the Idle Strand, and we were the label, so I pretty much count Idiot Savant as the first band that we actually signed to the label.
Okay.
So for Brian, it's kind of a full circle thing, you know. We started out in those days, and we recorded a band he had called the Fontanas as well.
Yeah, I remember the Fontana. Great name.
We're looking to try to remaster some of those songs and maybe get that reissued. It never really came out. And but the new album's really good. Great variety of stuff. My wife's in the band, Terry Owens.
Okay.
And she was in the Flamin' O's and Tet Noir and the Babysitters.
Yeah, I used to play with Tet Noir back in the day.
And, of course, Tom used to book the Babysitters, so there's all these connections that keep coming back, I guess, over the years.
That great trio of rock and roll here in Minnesota. Tom Murray, you also are kind of a mentor to a handful of younger bands, like the Carnegies.
Yeah. They're, in my opinion, they're the upcoming band that people should really check out in Minnesota here. They're into doing their own thing.
Yeah, and they've got the look. Royce and Roman Mars, twin brothers, nephews of Chris Mars, drummer for the Replacements. It's all kind of connected, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're in the studio now doing their next album, and these kids. Yeah, that's why I call them kids.
They are
in their
20s.
In their 20s, and they have the gift.
Yeah,
they really do. And I've always said in my whole career that your talent is God given, your fame is public given, and your ego is self given. So watch out. Yeah.
That's sage advice from a elder of rock and roll, Tom Murray from Miller. Tom, I know you've played thousands of gigs over your life, but if there's one where you're sitting around one day going, man, I couldn't believe that happened. That was that cool. And there's probably a handful of gigs like that, but one off the top of your head, one of your favorite gigs of all time.
I think I have two in mind.
Go ahead.
And it's when we played with Led Zeppelin and when we played with The Who. And it was just, it was incredible. And again, I learned. I was there. I was talking to them, and that's when I realized that these people are rock stars. I did have one thing with the Stones when I was at Schoen, and the Stones were coming in, and I greeted them. So, I met them.
Yeah, but this was back with the Who and Zeppelin. They were fellow musicians.
Yeah, we had our records out. We weren't we were called a support band in those days. That we did have our records out, and people would bring their records, so it's a sign.
I imagine some of those early Litter records, the 45s or the albums, must be going for a nice chunk of coin on eBay.
If you can find an original Distortions, which is the first one, it's been anywhere from $4,000 to $7,000.
Wow.
For that one. $100 fine is around $400 to $500.
Wow.
And then
too bad you didn't have a closet full of any of those. Huh?
Yeah, at least a box.
At least one box.
I thought of it many times,
I remember Jerry Garcia saying something years ago that you should keep at least 10 copies for yourself of any record you put out or were on.
Yeah, I do have a copy of the original one, but one time I left it in the sun and it warped. So I brought it over to...
you can't take an iron and get it back flat again?
Well, who was it, Mike? Yeah, John Cass, if you know John.
Oh, I know John.
He took the record and he had a way to do it, but he couldn't even do it. You know.
Tom Murray, it's been so great talking to you. We just got about a minute left. Mike Owens, I have to ask you, the Replacements' Let It Be is considered one of their greatest records, one of the greatest records of the time. Do you remember what it was like hearing those songs and then like the finished versions? There had to be a certain amount of magic and mojo and excitement in the studio.
Well, yeah, there was. My partner, Steve Felstead, did the engineering on that record. And I remember being in Peter's apartment when they sent their first cassette in, that was real rough. And Peter could hear right away the songwriting and Paul's voice and stuff like that. So yeah, it was fun watching them evolve from the very first things they did to Let It Be, because Let It Be had a professional sound to it, which I know some of their fans aren't going to like to hear that because they, for some reason, don't want it to be professional.
Right.
But it was a really good record, good songs.
Well, you two guys, Mike Owens and Tom Murray, thank you so much for sharing these stories and your music on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. We're going to have you back on because I have a feeling it's just the tip of the iceberg here. But we will see you tomorrow at Mancini's for the release of the new Litter record and hanging out with a bunch of our old rock and roll buddies. So once again, thanks for being on the Wall of Power Radio Hour.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, brother. And good luck with the new record.
Thank you very so much.
Thanks for listening to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. The show is produced by Paul Metza, engineered by Brett Johnson. We'd like to thank our guests Mike Owens and Tom Donahue. Follow me at paulmetza.com every Thursday night at Child's 5:30 to 7:30 with Sonny Earl. And like my dad used to tell me, remember to be kind and make someone happy.
The high and the mighty